Welcome to the GRIPS lunchtime seminar. My name is Narushige Michishita. I teach International Security Affairs at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS, in Tokyo. The GRIPS lunchtime seminar, the objective is to make GRIPS faculty research accessible to a broader audience, especially policymakers, policy and area specialists, and informed citizens in Japan and overseas. Today, I have invited myself and Professor Yoko Iwama to talk about nuclear issues. The question is, how would China use its nuclear weapons against Japan, and what we should do about that? Professor Iwama is a specialist in European security and has written books, including an edited volume entitled Joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Deterrence, Non-Proliferation, and the American Alliance, published from Routledge in 2018. In this session, I will make a presentation first, and followed by Professor Iwama's comment, and then we will open the floor for Q&A and discussion. And by the way, please feel free to eat lunch. I'll be jealous, but that's fine. So please go ahead. Okay, so let's get started. Today, I will ask two questions and answer them. Question number one, how would China use its nuclear weapons against Japan in case of contingency? Question number two, what would we do, what should we do about that? Okay, let's talk about question number one. How would China use its nuclear weapons against Japan? Currently, the US and Japan are working together to deter China from attacking Taiwan. US and Japanese forces are formulating operation plans and conducting combined exercises to strengthen deterrence. And if deterrence ever fails, the two countries will do their best to defend Taiwan. Apparently, China doesn't like it and has started bolstering military diplomatic coercive campaigns toward Japan. China is attempting to undermine Japan's commitment to the defense of Taiwan, and if there is a war across the Taiwan Strait, China will use its military tools to coerce Japan into neutrality. What is China doing to achieve these goals? Let me start sharing the slides. Right. So China has deployed about 1,300 medium-range ballistic missiles, or MRBMs, capable of reaching Japan. It has also deployed 900 short-range ballistic missiles, or SRBMs, some of which can reach Okinawa. In this context, the Chinese ambassador to Japan made interesting remarks last year. In May 2024, Ambassador Wu Jianhao held a discussion session with former Japanese Prime Minister Yukio Hatoyama and Mizuho Kushima, who is a leader of the Japan Social Democratic Party. In that session, Ambassador Wu said, I sort of quote, if Japan interferes with China's internal affairs, which is Taiwan, the Japanese people would be brought into the fire, unquote. Mr. Wu, Ambassador Wu is a professional diplomat, but he was not too diplomatic here. China has also initiated a nuclear coercion campaign. Ostensibly, China has a no first use policy. However, in 2021, the Chinese Communist Party's military channel posted a video discussing the possibility of treating Japan as an exception to its no first use policy. That video was entitled CCP, or Chinese Communist Party, vows to nuke Japan continuously until it surrenders unconditionally for the second time. Let me quote from that video. It said, I quote, "By singling out Japan as an exception to our commitment not to use or be the first to use nuclear weapons in the world, Japan is an exception. We are warning Japan and informing the world that if Japan interferes militarily in our domestic affairs, including the unification of Taiwan by the mainland, nuclear weapons will surely be used against Japan and will be continuously used until its unconditional surrender." Currently, China has about 600 nuclear weapons, of which about 100 can be used on Dongfeng 26 DF-26 intermediate-range ballistic missiles. China might use nuclear-tipped DF-26 missiles in the Pacific theater. So how would China use its nuclear weapons against Japan? If China were to use nuclear weapons in a war across the Taiwan Strait, it would do so to neutralize Japan. Here is one scenario. China launches a war against Taiwan and strongly warns the US and Japan against military intervention. It then detonates nuclear weapons in a way that would not cause any physical harm in the air over the Western Pacific, for example. If the US and Japan continue to provide support to Taiwan despite the warnings, China will launch tactical nuclear strikes against the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces surface vessels. At first, China will attack a relatively small Japanese naval vessel while declaring that if the US retaliates with nuclear weapons against Chinese naval vessels, it will launch further nuclear attacks against Japanese naval vessels and the Japan Ground Self-Defense Forces anti-ship missile units deployed in the southwestern islands. China would use DF-26 ballistic missiles for demonstrative detonation at sea and for anti-ship operations. So that's for question number one. Let's go to the question number two. What should we do about that? Japan is doing at least three things. Oops, sorry, this is DF-26. Number one, Japan has deployed ballistic missile defense systems. One is an upper-tier exo-atmospheric system called SM-3, Standard Missile 3. And the other is a lower one on the left. And the other is a lower-tier endo-atmospheric system called Patriot PAC-3. Japan has spent more than $26 billion on ballistic missile defense systems and will continue to strengthen missile defense capabilities going forward. Number two, Japan has been taking civil defense measures to protect its citizens more effectively. It has installed early warning systems such as J-Alert. This is an automated siren and voice message warning system. And Japan has been conducting civil defense exercises. In fiscal year 2023, the Japanese government organized 43 civil defense exercises based on missile attack scenarios. And in fiscal year 2024, the Japanese government conducted 27 exercises. However, what is lacking is a nationwide civil defense exercise like the ones in South Korea or Taiwan. Finally, US and Japanese officials sit together twice a year to discuss ways to bolster the extended or the credibility of the extended nuclear deterrence that the US provides to Japan. The two countries have developed various scenarios and discussed how best to respond to them. Fortunately, the US has nuclear capabilities far superior to those of China at present, as you can see in the table. Before I wrap up my presentation, let me ask one final question. That is, in an extreme situation where China used nuclear weapons against Japan, how should we respond? There are four different approaches. The first one is asymmetric response. With this approach, we would use conventional weapons only, but start attacking more sensitive, high-value Chinese targets. This approach makes it easier for us to avoid nuclear escalation. The second approach would be graduated response. Here, we will use nuclear weapons only if China uses nuclear weapons for the second time, or we will use nuclear weapons in a more limited manner than China. Again, this approach makes it easier for us to avoid rapid nuclear escalation. The third approach would be called proportional response. With this approach, we will use nuclear weapons in the way that China used them against us. Or, so for example, if China used 3 nuclear weapons against us, we would ask the US to use 3 against China. Or we would use nuclear weapons in a way that will create proportional damage to China. Finally, the fourth approach would be called escalation dominance. Here, we would use nuclear weapons a bit more aggressively than China did in order to make Chinese decision makers realize that the more they escalate, the more they will lose. There are both advantages and a disadvantage to each approach. In any case, we must ask hard about how best to deter nuclear use in the first place. And that is the most important thing. That's it. Thank you very much. So as a moderator and presenter, let me invite Professor Iwama for comments and questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Michishita, for this very valuable question raising. I think it is a very important question that needs to be asked, and it is a very real one because we have actually seen the threat of nuclear use in Ukraine, which is reported to have happened sometime in late 2022. Nuclear weapon has not yet been used in Ukraine. Americans, as well as Indians and Chinese, are reported to have intervened in order to prevent that use. However, we do not have the assurance that it will remain so. And we have a different administration in Washington. So we might see a different development. So I think the danger of nuclear weapon being used, or the threat of it, is forever present. And obviously, China is closely watching what is happening in Ukraine. So far, my impression is that China merits from the nuclear taboo and the special value that is put on the nuclear weapons. I mean, these are very related things. that nuclear weapon is not a normal weapon, and therefore it has a special meaning when you cross the nuclear threshold. Whether you put a special value to this or not is an important thing. And my impression is that until now, China has put a value on this. I would like Professor Michishita's comment on this, whether he thinks this is the case. Now, the scenario that Professor Michishita presented, I think he thinks this is in a very near future, right?
Yeah.
Yes, not 10, 15 years ago, but within 5 years or so, I would guess. So he has not really stated the lead up to the crisis. And I think in such cases, first the lead up to the crisis, and then the initial response to the first demonstrational use would be very critical in what comes after. So I would like a little bit more input on how you expect both the US and the Japanese to be behaving in the lead up to the crisis and the initial response after the first demonstrational detonation. What do you think they might do, and what you would actually recommend them to do, and what you think the Japanese should be asking the US to do? I think these initial stage would be critical in influencing what comes afterwards. More in general, I would like to know what you think to be the strengths and weaknesses of the Chinese nuclear forces in this region, if they were to be used in regional crises. We all know that overall US has a huge dominance, but in the regional scenarios, they could have different meanings. Now, I totally agree with the need to for Japan and US to study various scenarios and develop plans, and that we need a mechanism for closer coordination. I also agree that psychological preparedness of both politician and the population is crucial in such cases. So I think there are multi-level efforts needed first to really prepare the so-called the security community as well as the politicians for such a scenario, and make sure that they have basic knowledge as well as psychological preparation for such cases, and then how to heighten the general resilience of the population, both in terms of civil defense and in terms of mental preparedness. So I think there are things that should be done nationally, and these are, I think, relatively clear. And then things that should be done on US-Japan level. And then there's things that Japan can do on regional and international level. So to prepare for such cases, so I would welcome your comments, what kind of initiatives Japan can take on such different levels. Thank you.
Right. I'm trying to turn on my video. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the comments and questions. Let me tackle the Chinese nuclear forces question first. And so I think the strength of China's nuclear arsenal is the fact that it's increasing rapidly, right? And also the number of nuclear weapons have been increasing rapidly, as well as the number of and the varieties of delivery means, namely missiles. So those are the strengths. And in terms of weaknesses, I think at this point, Chinese nuclear forces are much less capable than those of the United States. So if U.S. and China get into the competition war, like the game of escalation dominance, for example, China will lose, right? So that's a sort of from our perspective, it's a good news. And also, one of my scenario is something in which China attempts to attack Japanese naval vessels operating at sea, but attacking moving targets is actually not easy. So certainly the sensor capabilities, and situational ability to acquire situational awareness have improved dramatically in recent years. But still, I mean, it's not easy. So, certainly that makes it even more necessary for China to use nuclear weapons to attack moving targets, because conventional weapons would be hard for China to attack moving targets with and successfully with conventional weapons only. But that's a bad news, or good news, bad news. But anyway, and also I don't think China has conducted tests to use nuclear weapons at sea in order to destroy like naval vessels. So it would be very difficult for any military planners, to try whatever they have not tried in exercises. So that's another good news. In terms of how we should respond, and what we would like to ask the US to do, certainly if China used nuclear weapons, like detonating a nuclear bomb in the air, we would like to see the United States expressing strong commitment to the defense of Japan, or deterrent nuclear use against Japan. And that could involve demonstrative operations by submarine SSBNs, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, or mobilizing of some of the nuclear forces, not too provocative, certainly, but in a limited and controlled manner. And secondly, Japanese politicians must stand up and stand firm against such coercion, because the bad news is China might have used weapons. Good news, the likelihood is that China has used it for coercive purposes only, and that China does not have real intention to use nuclear weapons against Japan physically in order to destroy something. So if that is more about psychological coercion than real physical destruction, psychological defense is more important than physical defense, right? So politicians' response is important, and also what's important is Japanese citizens' awareness of the nature of the threat. What is China trying to achieve with this detonation of a nuclear bomb in the air? And also understanding of how this nuclear umbrella or extended nuclear deterrence works. And if you understand how things are working, different factors are moving and working, functioning, then the likelihood of Japanese citizens, me and you, giving into China's military coercion will be lower. So that's what I would expect, and what I hope to see. And so in that sense, I think the civil defense exercises and the civil defense measures are very important, because it has two objectives. One is certainly in case of something, natural disasters or war, whatever, we will be able to minimize the damage, right? And minimize the death and casualties. But the second one is to enhance our psychological preparedness to military coercion. And in most of the cases, China has 1,300 missiles, but most of them, in my opinion, will be used against military targets in Japan. So that means not too many missiles will be used against civilian targets, because that way China will be wasting their missiles, and they will be undermining their ability to attract or destroy US or Japanese armed forces, which would start posing a physical threat to China later on. So I think what we should do is to think about those kinds of issues. And there are some operational tactical response. We have to certainly introduce deception and concealment measures when we operate naval ships. And that's what the US Navy was doing aggressively during the Cold War against vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And US Navy was quite successful in concealing the whereabouts of their naval vessels at sea. And also, we can certainly, talk about how best to respond to these issues, possibilities, and send a message to China that we think about it, and that we are psychologically and physically prepared for such actions. I think.
Of course, US-Japan is one. I think you've very well covered the US-Japan level. What about the regional partners? With whom do we need to coordinate beforehand? Regionally.
Regionally, I think it's basically about the US and Japan, because the Taiwan, the US, and Japan will be the countries which will be engaged. If the political leaders make such a decision, militarily engaged with combat operations to defend Taiwan. Other countries such as South Korea, Australia, India, certainly we would like to see the help us. In case of Australia, maybe we will send a special operation forces to help us, but they will not be the main fight. We will not provide main fighting forces to the situation. So I think basically coordination among the U.S. policymakers, specialists, citizens, if possible, and among Japanese political leaders, specialists, commentators on TV. They are very influential and informed citizens in this country.
Yeah, but I think the decision to go nuclear has a global implication, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to remember that, far way back in case of Korean War, the UK wanted to be consulted when America was going to go nuclear. Yeah. So, do we have to, consult with others, or is it really going to be US-Japan crisis response team that's moving ahead?
Yeah, well, if we start consulting with other entities, that might undermine the credibility of less extended nuclear deterrence, because there will be some people who would say, or countries who would say no, and so that's a dangerous proposition, and we would not want to do it. But certainly, we would like to marshal international support from nations, from people against any use of either demonstrative or actual use of, or coercive, demonstrative, and actual use of nuclear weapons against anybody.
Well, I would just comment that I'm not proposing any sort of regional or global consultation forum, but again, our partners around the globe needs to be aware that this is a possible scenario and that it will touch their own fate as well. Okay.
Would you like to talk about support?
Well, Well, civil defense in Europe, I think, is different really from country to country. During the Cold War, it was relatively more coordinated. I have seen underground operational centers in many NATO countries that are today left as museums, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, but
They are not reusable.
I'm not so sure. Maybe they are, and there are talks of it, but not really. I think it's only probably Finland that's really ready for a very tense scenario. In general, I think Sweden, Finland is relatively ready. Switzerland is not a NATO country, but is relatively ready on civil defense. Apart from that, I think a lot of countries, I mean, there's been talked recently in Germany how it's totally lacking in shelters. So I think we're at a very early stage. And how to heighten the preparedness, so to say, in a relatively economical way would be something that we might be able to talk together, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Let's open the floor for Q&A. And let me start with Yvonne and here in this room. So if you have any questions or comment, please raise your hand, identify yourself, and say what you would like to say. Please.
You seem to assume that in a Taiwan contingency, Japan will definitely be involved and help to defend Taiwan. Is this just a condition in this scenario, or are you more broadly very confident that Japan would indeed defend Taiwan and join the US if China were to invade militarily? And the second question is, I find you're very confident that escalation can be controlled. And given the fact that for many of the nuclear weapons on the Chinese side of the US, many of them are in silos, and we all know what the silos are. And I think many people who look at those things will say that in a nuclear war, these silos will be targeted very quickly, because if the US will obviously want to use them, because if they don't use the missiles there, then they soon disappear. It's not the same thing with submarines, because submarines, you don't know where you are, so those nuclear weapons are much harder to find. But for nuclear weapons in silos, it will be in the interest of whoever is in a nuclear conflict with the United States to take them down quickly, because they will fear that the US will use them. So all this to say that my sense is that controlling escalation is extremely difficult in the context of nuclear weapons, because there will be an incentive on both sides to use those kinds of assets very, very quickly. And so then within a short period of time, you just have a global nuclear war. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. The first question, would Japan get involved? We don't know. I didn't assume Japan's involvement, but I'm saying China would do everything to prevent Japan from getting involved. And so there will be a contention, right? And so that's my question for the first question. And second question, I didn't say we would be able to escalate will control the escalation, but I think that from your logic, it wouldn't escalate in the way that you just suggested, because in this kind of scenario, China will be using, if you can take a look at this. Sharing. Yeah, so if you take a look at the Chinese nuclear, this one. So China will be using a DF-26 intermediate range missiles, ballistic missiles for tactical use. These missiles are all mobile and operated on mobile launchers. Therefore, we would not be able to destroy them quickly. And so in a way, it's more tougher for us to get, eliminate them. That's a bad news. Good news, there will be no rapid escalation because we would not be able to preempt them, right? And similarly, if you take a look at the U.S. Nuclear arsenal, which is this, the U.S. will be using, likelihood is, I don't know, U.S. nuclear employment plan, but my guess is the U.S. will be using, low yield nuclear weapons such as Mark 4.8 with like 8 kilotons of explosion yield. I've highlighted those low yield nuclear forces, or air launched cruise missiles or free fall bombs, which can have low yield, low explosion yield, and also tactical non-strategic forces deployed on different fighter aircraft, dual capable aircraft. These are all mobile and highly survivable. So it would not be, China would not start launching, nuclear attacks against silos in the U.S. The U.S. would not start launching nuclear weapons against Chinese silos. So there will be no rapid escalation or attempt to preempt each other's nuclear forces. Certainly, they would do to some extent, but that would not be like automatic escalation. Is there any other questions in the book? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that you do not see, regional partners of Japan, for example, really entering this conflict unless it might be for support. I'm curious about, on the Chinese side, do you see Russia or North Korea supporting China? I think I saw an article a couple of days ago where some documents were leaked that Russia might be supplying China with weapons to seize Taiwan. I think that was the wording for the article. So I'm curious what you think about the Chinese side of the matter. And if Russia were part of this, how would maybe Europe be pulled into this whole conflict? It was mentioned that we also in Europe building up our capabilities as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, certainly. I just wrote a report. I don't know the evidence. I didn't read the original one, but it was reported that by somebody that China and Russia has a sort of a secret agreement to help each other in case of contingency. But generally speaking, yes, China would ask Russia and North Korea to create a crisis situation or on the Korean Peninsula or in the Sea of Japan and this region in order to divert US and Japanese forces away from the Taiwan Strait. The difficulty that we face is that the US-Japan alliance is there to defend Japan, defend South Korea, defend Taiwan, right? So we have multiple purposes. And if there is a crisis on the Korean Peninsula, for example, we have to, our forces will be diverted. And so that's what if I, our Mr. Xi Jinping, I would definitely ask Kim Jong-un and Putin to create crisis in this region in order. But I'm not too concerned about the war breaking out on the Korean Peninsula because I would say ask Kim Jong-un to create a crisis without provoking a war. Because if there is a war, war on the Korean Peninsula, it's close to Beijing, right? And the Chinese forces would be diverted away from the Taiwan Strait. So crisis on the Korean Peninsula, general crisis and tension in this region would certainly help China.
There are several questions that are related. All of nuclear weapons, China can employ a very high yield. TF-26 warhead is 450 kiloton, blah, blah, blah. So it looks very inevitable that we will see a massive escalation once China uses any of these nuclear arsenals. Also, nuclear fallout could be a huge problem.
Yeah.
That's his comment.
Yeah.
And then,
let me respond. Yeah, exactly. So that's why I would say the likelihood of actual use is, be at sea. Because at sea, if you use that, we have talked about during the Cold War, using nuclear weapons at sea was quite relatively easy. Because there will be no, if the target is military, naval vessels are military targets, so there will be no collateral damage. And also, explosion at sea would be, you have to have a very high yield explosion in order to destroy very highly protected, armored naval vessels. So that's only natural for China to use high yield. And that doesn't necessarily mean, unfortunately, in my opinion, automatic escalation. If I believe in automatic escalation, I would not be concerned about China's use of nuclear weapons at sea as much as I am. Because if China thinks it would automatically escalate into major exchange of nuclear weapons, China wouldn't use nuclear weapons at sea in the first place. But because it might not provoke automatic escalation, the likelihood is higher that China uses nuclear weapons at sea.
So you think these high yield, not very precise weapons are actually suited for current state of Chinese strategy? Because
I don't know whether this is a Chinese strategy, but this is my worry, concern. I was putting myself on the Chinese military planners position. If I'm military leader in China, Xi Jinping asked me to attack Taiwan tomorrow, what would I do? It's very difficult for me to take Taiwan without using nuclear forces. I should use. But in what way? I don't want to see escalation of nuclear exchange, because the US has a superior nuclear forces. So
this is very current as well as future problems, right? What kind of nuclear force would we want the Chinese to possess? And so this is related to Ken Endo's question. Do you think Chinese would in future shift more towards tactical and precision-based nuclear weapons?
That's a very interesting question. So we'll see. We can keep watching how China will strengthen its nuclear forces to understand the shifting, changes or shifts in Chinese intentions and operational ideas. So that would be nice. But at this point, they are strengthening everything. We don't know where the emphasis is. So we'll see.
But, in order to make proposals for future arms control, we need to have our own idea about what kind of a nuclear forces structure is more stable, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is a question that needs
to be but I don't think China wants to see stable nuclear environment, because they would like to exercise nuclear capabilities as much as possible, as Putin did. Sometimes if you are a peace-loving person, certainly you would like to see stable nuclear balance or posture. But if you are thinking about invading somebody else, you don't want to see the stability. And so what you would like to see is a stability instability paradox, right? And it's exploited to the maximum possible extent. Okay. Anything else?
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah,
we could tackle Gail's question. I'd like to ask what signals and indications we should look for to assess whether Japan and the US are coordinating well or on extended deterrence. Do you agree with some reports that suggest there's a gap between the US and Japan under the Trump administration?
Well, I think there is a gap between the US and all the other countries, and so it's not necessary. So our officials meet twice a year to discuss this, and that's great progress. We are not meeting regularly until 2010, and we have come a long way. And also, we have started to disclose more information regarding what we talked about in those extended deterrence dialogue. So we are kind of started to send signals both to the Chinese observers as well as Japanese citizens that we are talking about this. We are enhancing deterrence, enhance the credibility of the U.S. extended deterrence. So to China, don't start a war here. And to the Japanese people, we are doing a lot, our best to make our deterrence credible. So feel safe, but feel, be prepared. All right. So,
Is there any more questions on the floor?
Okay.
One Harry's question.
Maybe one last question.
What about the risk? Oh, there's another
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I answered this question.
Yeah.
So, we assess China's non-question.
You've already answered.
Yeah. So this no force use policy, policy is there, so that's good. But can we buy into it? I don't know. And so hotline between China and Japan, certainly that would be nice, but I don't think Chinese counterpart would pick the phone up when we call them. They'll be probably picking up phones from the US president, but not from the Japanese prime minister. That's why the US and Japan really have to coordinate very closely. Right. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We had an interesting conversation, and we would like to continue this. Right. And I've written a short paper on this subject matter, so share this with you in the chat box so that if you're interested, you can take a look at it later. It's the link. And finally, the next one announcement, the next Scripps lunchtime seminar is scheduled for October 22nd. We will invite Scripps Professor Takashi Tsuchiya, who is present there. Right? Yeah, I can show you. And so he will talk about an analysis and forecast of the relationship between governance, economic systems, and social development in the nations of the world. And is it going to be English or Japanese?
I was assuming Japanese.
Japanese, okay. But if you would like to hear he speak, please approach him later after this and tell him to speak in English or both. All right, so thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all in the next Scripps lunchtime seminar. Thank you.